I'm Ashley Ratcliffe, and I'm the Director of Communications and Operations with We Are Ill. We are so excited to welcome our guest today. We are going to be discussing a pretty hot topic in the MS space, and that is diversity in clinical trials. And first, I would like to throw it to our panelists for a quick introduction. Take it away, Dr. Rosenthal.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm Jackie Rosenthal. I'm a neurologist. I work in Atlanta at Shepherd Center, the MS Institute there. I've been a neurologist for 10 years, and I've been focused on MS over the past 5 years, actually. And so it's been an awesome area to work in, and I'm glad to be here to discuss a very important topic.
Awesome. Dr. Okai?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege and an honor to be on this show. I am Annette Kai. I practice in Plano, Texas. I'm Director of Neuroimmunology and MS Research at North Texas Institute of Neurology. I've been practicing multiple sclerosis and neurology for the past 13 years. And it's something that is near and dear to my heart. I can't see myself doing anything else. It's all I ever done, and I love it and hopefully continue to be in this space. And I'm glad to be talking about clinical research because, as my title indicates, I love research. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Anita?
Hi, my name is Anita Williams. I am a person living with multiple sclerosis. I was first diagnosed in 2014. It was confirmed in 2015. I am so pleased and excited to be here. Thank you for having me. From the first day of my diagnosis, I've been passionate about research. So this is just a wonderful opportunity, and I'm excited to give the perspective of somebody with MS.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I forgot to add, I have been living with MS since March 2018. So my fifth year of diagnosis we're coming up upon. So to start, we know that Black patients have better health outcomes when they are under the care of Black medical professionals. And increasing the pipeline of Black women in STEM will help, improve access to clinical trials and also help repair the Black community's mistrust of medical professionals. So I would love to hear from our doctors on the call. What exactly inspired you to pursue a career in STEM and be a medical professional?
Well, I'll go first. So I can say from a very young age, I've always loved science, and I was fortunate to have teachers and Black teachers who really facilitated that and encouraged me to pursue that. And I think that just kind of lent itself to a particular mindset. And over time, I was able to really hone in on what my interests were, how I best could serve as a medical professional while also kind of, focusing on the things that brought me joy, made me happy, and that I was actually interested in. And so that's what ultimately led to becoming a doctor, then focusing on neurology, and ultimately landed me in the MS field here.
Dr.
So
Okai?
for me, once again, at a very young age, like Jackie said, I was always interested in science. So I think it's about knowing yourself and knowing what you like. You're going to hear a lot of voices that will influence you over time, but you also have to know what makes you happy and what brings you joy. And so science was that for me. And interestingly, I'm the only one of my siblings that actually is in the scientific field. Everyone else is right brain. So imagine that. But I knew what I like and what I wanted to be, and it just involved, okay, I like taking care of patients and I'm going to be a doctor. And then once you set that course, then you start to see what interests you again to move on. And that's what I did. I was privileged to have a very good mentor who then mentored me into the MS field. So overall, along the way, once you know who you are, then you start finding your support team to get you to where you want to be and help you get there, make you understand what it takes to get there. And so building up that support team is important. The same with everything in life, how we support each other is also very important.
Yes, definitely. Now, what advice would you give to young Black women who are interested in pursuing a career, maybe as a neurologist or something in STEM? What advice would you give them, Dr. Rosenthal?
I when I hear that question, I kind of think like, what would I give the younger me as advice, to make me more successful? And I think I would tell myself to be more confident and to not be affected by self-doubt. I think that when you enter into a field where you are a racial and gender minority, it could be overwhelming. And especially depending on who you are surrounded with in terms of support, you can get into a place where maybe there's some negative self-talk and can I do this? And now that I've been doing it, I'm like, I got this, and I wish I would have known that I got this before, so I wasn't wasting brain energy on that amount of stress. And so I think it's really important also, as Dr. Okai said, to have that village and that support. And as women and Black women, having people around you who are going to encourage you, because self-doubt is inevitable at any journey you encounter. You just don't want it to become so overpowering. And so it really helps when you have that sense of community as well. So my advice would be to be confident, don't fall prey to self-doubt, and surround yourself by positive people.
Awesome. Anything to add, Dr. Okay?
Similar advice, like Dr. Rosenthal said, you have to have that support because doubts are going to creep in when you're the only one in the room that look like you through a lot of the journey from beginning to end. So we have not only in clinical trials, they're underrepresentation, but start at medical school advanced degrees. And then you go, as you move up, the numbers become less. And it's a sad thing because as you move up, the more support you need actually, but the number becomes less. And when you are the only one at that table or in that environment, it takes a whole lot to continue to pursue what you are. So don't give up, find your support system and be strong. Don't just take no for an answer. Don't let people dissuade you from your goals. Stick to it if that's what you want to do, and you will get there eventually. While it's harder as you go up, it also, in a way, paradoxically becomes easier as well because you have, I would like to say, the battle scars from from earlier on that you can take your strength from. So surround yourself as best as you can and trust in yourself, trust in your instinct, and you'll get where you need to be.
Yes, amazing advice. I think we all as Black women suffer, or not suffer, but we experience that doubt a little bit. Like we're the only, like there's maybe some pressure from ourselves, our family, you just feel it. So that's great advice. I'd like to dive into what exactly a clinical trial is. I know that who knows what people think. Maybe they think you're being poked and prodded. Maybe who knows what it is. Well, you guys know. That's why we're here. So I just wanted to clarify what exactly is a clinical trial, Dr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, so it's actually a really broad term. So it's a type of research study where they're basically looking at some sort of test or treatment and determine what's the outcome of that. Is it effective? Is it safe? And they're collecting information about that. When we talk about this test or treatment, I mean, it could be a medication, it could be a device, a diagnostic test. I mean, it covers a lot of ground in terms of what that could be. And when we talk about um, interventional clinical trials, which is a lot of what our drug treatment trials are that lead to the approval of the drugs we use in MS. These are those, interventional studies where, as the name implies, there is an intervention. So they're doing something, exposing you to something as a part of that study to see how it works. What are the outcomes of that? And so that's the more commonly thought of in terms of clinical trial. But there are also non-interventional or observational studies where they're simply just watching you and collecting information about how you do without actually changing your medical treatment course.
Got it. And then Dr. Okai, can you run us through a little bit about what the process looks like from start to finish?
Yeah, just before I do that, I also like to add another definition of a clinical trial. So the interventional and non-interventional, like Dr. Rosenthal said, that they're also observational, but we also have to consider registries as well, which provide real-world data where you are not being given a new device or a new medication. So there are a whole range of it. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the interventional part, where we are looking towards if one molecule, this new drug, if it's going to be effective. So let's talk about that first. So from beginning to end, so the trial, the design is conceived by scientists and corporations, and to put a criteria in place. We call it inclusion exclusion criteria. And the trials itself goes through years of planning and executing. So we have phase one, phase two, phase three, phase four. Most people are familiar with phase three, but before it gets to phase three, we have phase one in humans, phase two in humans, and it starts as a very small, in the 10 to 50, that's phase one. We're looking at if it's safe. Are we seeing any kind of signal? And then it goes to phase two. Basically, is it effective? And these are very simple and broad explanation. Obviously, there are lots more detail to it, but just the way to look at it. The first phase, is it safe in humans? Next, is it effective? And once we have established those two, then we open it to the wider audience where it could be hundreds and up to 1,000 patients world over. And in that phase three is when we look at more people and see if, now that we have tested in 102, if we can replicate it and we are not seeing any new safety issues, or if there are problems with efficacy, we establish it at that time. And then phase four is when it's already approved by the FDA. The FDA requires that companies continue to conduct safety trials. So the drug is on the market, but we're still taking data and following people to make sure that it continues to be safe. We don't want 5 years down the road, oh, you know what? This great drug that we had, now we don't think it's so great anymore because of what happened. And so when we talk about a diverse clinical trial, phase three is where we are really focusing on, although we want to look earlier, but we have to take things as they come. So most of our clinical trials in the past have been very underrepresented with various populations. And, for good reasons, we talk about mistrust. You hear all about that because underrepresented, especially minority populations, have been mistreated in the past. But because of that, we have new laws now, and it's global. It's not only now to the US, it's now global, that with any clinical trial being conducted, you have to follow a set of ethics guidelines.
Mhm.
And principal investigators have to go through training every 2 to 4 years to make sure that they are following those guidelines, and we're really scrutinized with a magnifying glass. Did you follow this protocol? Is it the right is it the right documentation? All of that is have now been set in place because of the injuries in the past that were caused to people of color concerning clinical trials. So now, because of that, you are looked at more closely. You have even more access to your doctor when you're in a clinical trial because it's so strictly regimented to prevent what happened in the past from happening again. So phase one, phase two, phase three, phase four, all of these phases have stringent criteria, and the FDA can come in at any time to make sure that investigators are adhering to the practices of ethical clinical research. So that's one thing I want to really stress on, that because of what happened in the past, we now have safeguards in place to protect subjects who participate in our trial. And this is all voluntary. So you can start a clinical trial. And if you decide this isn't working for you, you can withdraw your consent. Or if the investigator decide that, huh, even though I put you in this trial, I don't think it's the best for your care. They can remove you from the trial as well. So lots of things in place to prevent what happened and also to keep our volunteers, subjects very safe when it comes to clinical trials.
That's really reassuring to know. And I think our viewing audience would be happy to hear that there are protocols and things, and not even after the medicine's like on the market, that's still being vetted and making sure that it's still safe. So that put me at ease. Um, I would love to switch gears and talk to our panelist who has participated in clinical trials. So Anita, so what can you tell me about what motivated you to even start pursuing um, taking part in clinical trials?
When I was first diagnosed or potentially diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, my story is I kind of went from the nosebleed to MS in 2.5 hours, literally. One of the first things I did, actually, the very first thing I did was open my phone and look up multiple sclerosis. And I wanted to find research, particularly how it affected African Americans. And the first thing I found was that there wasn't a whole lot of information available. And so from that really just kind of geared up my excitement about, wait a minute, not a, where is this information? I'm getting a little, concerned, a little hot under the collar, and then realized that not only recognizing a problem is one thing, but being a part of the solution is another part of it. And so I decided to do clinical trials for two reasons. One, because of the fact that there wasn't information available, and I wanted to be a part of that solution and to be that person. And then secondarily, to honor those who came before me, on whose shoulders I am standing, and saying that you took that risk, you took that jump. There are studies where African Americans said, I will do this. And I wanted to honor their commitment and their work, their sacrifice by doing that same thing and sharing that and paying it forward.
Awesome. So for you, what has the experience been like participating in clinical trials?
Um, I've had a few different experiences. The very first one I participated in was when I had two lumbar punctures or spinal taps. And the second one that I had, they asked me, well, we've already taken a vial of your spinal fluid. Can we have a second one for research? And I'm already laying there on the table. And I said, sure, as long as I get to see the vial. So, but then the one that was after that, and I'm glad that the doctor mentioned the continuing work, was actually a clinical trial for my very first MS medication that was oral. And it was a medication that was newly introduced to the market. And so that clinical trial involved me using that medication. But then every time I went for a blood draw, taking a couple of extra vials of blood at that point in order to continue to do research. And since I was already there because of my initial diagnosis, that was not a difficulty to have to go ahead and to do that. And at the same time, I participated in a additional trial that went along with it that actually asked me about how I was feeling. How was I feeling with the medication? How was I feeling emotionally? How were things going during this time period? And so having the opportunity to participate in clinical trials at different levels has been incredibly fulfilling. I am happy that I did them. And ultimately, they were just really, really well done. Everyone was incredibly kind. Everyone explained things clearly. But most of all, they made sure that I knew that it was my choice to be in those trials, that it was my choice to leave the trial at any point in time. And they were really, really, really careful to monitor my health and to make sure that every step of the way that I was taken care of on all levels, physically, emotionally, mentally.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that you've had a great experience. What would you say to encourage Black women living with MS to participate in research like that?
I would say the first thing is to actually ask. Oftentimes, I was lucky. Where I am being treated is a university. So they are running clinical trials fairly regularly. And so to be asked to participate is something that they do on a regular basis. However, I know that healthcare providers may not always know about what clinical trials are happening, and that information doesn't always get transmitted from researcher to healthcare professional to patient. So I'd say the first thing to do is to ask your healthcare provider if they're aware of any clinical trials for which you might be eligible. And then after that, there are other resources that you can use to actually find out and actively search for those clinical trials. But first, check with your healthcare professional. They would be the best person to talk with you because they know what health plan you're on, what direction you're going, and then they can provide you with the best information to help you do that.
Got it. And then something that I've also wondered is from the doctor's perspective, what makes a good candidate for a clinical trial? Is it different in every situation, or are there a set of guidelines that are, transferable to depending, regardless of the trial?
Yeah, it definitely varies with every type of study. I think that that question in and of itself really highlights the importance of having a good relationship with your neurologist or your treating doctor, because they're going to know what's best for you. And even if you potentially bring a study to them, hey, I heard about this, you want someone that you trust enough to say, no, this one isn't for you, or yes, this one is, or, and potentially bring things to you that maybe you didn't know about, but are going to be in your best interest. Because one of the things that I think we don't highlight enough sometimes is how individually advantageous clinical trials are for certain people who may have exhausted all other available treatments. And in that setting, I mean, you really can, there's all these other reasons for the community to do it, but you could do it for selfish purposes too, and that's okay. And that's, and so having that relationship is important. Oftentimes, a lot of clinical trials, they are extremely stringent, because as you can imagine, with these trials, you really want to only measure the outcome of whatever that intervention is, that drug or treatment. And so you don't want other, variables to contribute to that. And so for that reason, how we use medications in the real world and how they're used in clinical trials varies. So there are often age restrictions. There are going to be restrictions with regard to what other medical conditions someone may or may not have, laboratory values, for example. And unfortunately, sometimes it's laboratory abnormalities that we see that disproportionately affect people of color. And then now they can't, so these are also items that have to be addressed on the research side. But that's where, again, talking to your doctor about that is, but it truly varies. There are some things that are pretty consistent with regard to age, and then a lot of things that are truly variable. Taking a certain medication may exclude you from participating in a clinical trial, but it wouldn't necessarily exclude you from taking that drug in real life.
Got it. And then what progress, if any, has been made to consider or involve Black patients in clinical trials?
So, before we move forward with that question, Ashley, I'd like to just point out that another reason to consider participating in clinical trials is that, especially MS clinical trial, is that the observations that we see in underrepresented minorities in a diverse population is different in terms of how the disease progresses, how it's treated. So, getting patients enrolled earlier on before the drug comes to market, we can assess efficacy in that group long before it comes to the market, and we say, wow, oh, this doesn't work in our population like it did in the other population. Or if there is a certain safety signal, like it may be good for one population, but in this diverse population, the safety may not be the best. So if we know that early on, that will alleviate a whole lot of going back and say, do not use in this population because it may cause this. The second thing I like to highlight, and like you said, it's a hot topic, but the cost of medication, especially MS medication, make people miss out on cutting edge treatments. Okay, so even if we have a good drug out there, if someone's underinsured, uninsured, or even insured but with a high copay, they miss out on certain treatment because their healthcare provider will say, well, based on this, and if you can afford it, I'm going to put you on this therapy when it may not be the most efficacious for them. And that's where clinical trials can fill that void. But I like to say the progress that have been made. Pleased to know that since December 2022, so a few weeks ago, the FDA actually made it a law that everyone conducting clinical trials should have a plan in place to for diversity and inclusion in clinical trial. So before, for the longest time, it was a recommendation from the FDA. Oh, we recommend, and these are the guidelines to help you involve more people. Well, we know a recommendation doesn't hold a lot of weight over most people. But now it's a law. If you want your drug approved, if you want it to be reviewed by the FDA, you have to show that plan. So it affects how the drug is approved, how the drug is marketed, and when something is affecting bottom line, we can be sure that changes are going to come. But I'm saying that, but 2020 brought a whole lot of change and awareness. So some companies also had plans in place to improve that, but now it's going to be we have to, not that, oh, we think we need to. So that's the big progress, a big step forward for clinical research when it comes to diverse populations.
I love to hear that. Like, I'm glad that it's like, I mean, it should have been included to begin with, but now it's like there's like something to put them to the fire. Like, like you have to have
Yes,
this. I
yes.
would love to, I think I know, but I would love to hear from you. Like, why is it important to have diversity in research participation?
So I think, when you look at any disease process, not just MS, there can be differences in how the disease presents and how it reacts to treatments based on tons of variables, potentially gender or age, ethnic or racial differences as well. And so if you have a studied group and it's not diverse, well, you can only apply those results to the group that you studied. And you look at, a lot of the MS research that is primarily white men and women, it's very difficult for me as a neurologist to tell my Black MS patient, like, yes, this drug has been studied, but not in people that look like you. And I think that as a medical community, when it comes to MS, we're still learning a lot in terms of how the disease presents and responds to various treatments. But at the end of the day, that representation matters in clinical trials because our results need to be, generalizable to our population.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question. just selfishly. So I recently learned that I don't know if it's beta interferons or interferon betas, but that form of medication has been found to be least effective in Black MS patients, is what I heard. Um, and it's funny because, well, not funny, but my first MS medicine was a beta interferon, and so I just wonder if my neurologist knew that, would he have decided to prescribe me something different? Like, so I guess my question is, to what degree do medical professionals stay up to date on like the research? Is there like a mass like bulletin that comes out like, hey, breaking news, we just learned X, Y, and Z? Like, how will they know these things?
So it's important that you see specialists if you have a disease that is chronic. And so this is one of those things that I'll encourage people to see MS specialists. But going back to your question about the beta interferon was the first drug approved for multiple sclerosis. And for the longest time, for about 12 to 13 years, that was all we had, along with glatiramer. The issue is that when you look at the beta interferon clinical trial, I could count on this hand the number of blacks that were in the trial. Yes, this hand. I didn't say this. I said this. Yes. So if you have that small of a number in a clinical trial, you can then put it into the real world and make decisions based on that. It was only after the drug came onto the market that we started using it in everyone. And then a few astute clinicians said, let's in my observation, this isn't looking as I see it in this group. Why is the reason? By this time, everyone's on the drug. It's too expensive to go back and look at that. But majority of people will say, I didn't respond as well. But can we just say generally that this is the case? No, we cannot, because we just don't have the number. So once again, it goes back. We need to be involved early on. We need to be involved early on. And so I like to give a shout out to Anita here. I heard her talking years back. We were designing a clinical trial actually especially for underserved population, and we were going back and forth regarding the inclusion criteria. And some people were, we need to include this, and the other group was, no, we should not, because I don't think they're gonna like it. And Anita made this statement that stuck with me until now. I use it with my patients. She said, why would you treat us differently like you than you would treat anyone else you were designing this clinical trial for? And so now every time I'm talking and I'm talking to my patients, I say, I don't treat you any differently when it comes to laying out all the options, including what's approved in clinical trial, than I would someone who was of a different race or ethnicity. Okay, so that's something that stuck with me from a patient advocate. So even though I think that I'm well versed in diversity in clinical trial, we can all still learn from more. So the beta interferon trial that you mentioned, Ashley, was what led this movement in MS to say, no, we need to look more at this population and if our drug works. The needle has shifted just a little, but we needed to move. We needed to move. Yeah. So if there isn't an email blast that come on and said, oh no, don't use this in the Black population, because there may be some people, some Black people that it won't work in, but we just don't have enough data to state that fact.
Awesome. Well, shout out to Anita. I love that you
Okay.
said that, and it like is changing
Thank
the
you.
trajectory of how people work.
Well,
Um,
that's wonderful to hear. And I
Sometimes you
would,
make an impact and you don't even know it, right?
no, I'm tickled. I'm just overwhelmed. Wow. Um, and the one thing that kind of to play off on that same conversation, the importance of that diversity in clinical trials is that as Black women living with multiple sclerosis, we are going to be making a lot of decisions along our journey. And when clinical trials are diverse, the information that we have to make our best decisions can come from the most accurate and the best data possible. And that's why that diversity is so important, because no matter how long you have had this chronic illness, whether you're new, whether you are in that middle stage or you're an old timer, you're consistently going to be asked to make decisions about your health care. And when you have the knowledge, then you have power. And we can make powerful, better decisions for ourselves when there's that diversity that comes in that knowledge. And I'm very excited about the FDA. It's been a very long time coming. And it's just wonderful to be with Black women in so many different spaces and areas where we are just standing, standing 10 toes down, saying, we will not be denied, we will not be ignored, we are here, and you're going to listen to us. And I love that. And I'm so proud to be among such wonderful women doing such great work in all facets of all organizations.
Yes. Oh, I'm so fired up. It's like, I love hearing that. And yeah, this has been such an enlightening talk, and I really appreciate all that you all have shared. Do you all have any final thoughts that you would like to share about your experience, Anita, or you two doctors, about just your involvement in clinical research?
I can add and I know our community has been scarred by so much medical abuse throughout history. One thing to note is with Tuskegee, they were withholding medication. So that's one important thing. And there's no use of placebos. So if you are participating in a clinical trial and you are receiving medication, they no longer use placebos. So you do not have to worry that you are not getting the actual medication, but that you're getting something else to be compared to. And I think that's important for our population to understand, is that there's not going to be that sort of work going on any longer. You will not be deprived of actual medication if you're in a clinical trial where that's part of it.
Amazing. Anything else to add, Dr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, I loved what Anita said with her first clinical trial. Like, she's literally getting a lumbar puncture and they're like, hey, it was, I like highlighting how it was very kind of not as big of a deal, because you're already getting a procedure. They're adding on a couple minutes to get an extra tube. And I think that's awesome to show how, like, didn't necessarily jump in with both feet, but you dipped your toe in the water first, and then you got more and more comfortable. And so I like to always just highlight that not all research is this huge, big, scary thing that's going to be life altering. Again, you can sign up for a registry where you go online and do some questionnaires. That is very inoffensive, and so I just, for people who are maybe a little hesitant, there are so many different ways to contribute to research that is very easy to do. And so I think that's just a really important thing to highlight. And the other thing I would say, for anyone who's listening, that's considering going into the field, or knows people in their family or in contact with someone, that it's really important that we do increase our representation in science and in the research teams. We know that when the research team is diverse, we're better at helping. Patients are more comfortable. Patients of color are more comfortable engaging in research. And so that's another effort where we're talking about trying to make advances and shift the needle a little bit. We need to do better with the diversity of our research teams.
Yes, and so one statistic that I want to point out is that Black women are being diagnosed with MS at a way higher rate than any other population. So one way of getting your voice heard is clinical trials. So making it a priority to know that what's happening in the trial world can be applicable to you over time. So think about that. Clinical trials aren't for everyone. And like Dr. Rosenthal said earlier, there are some trials that you may be eligible for and some that you may not. And sometimes it's good to just stay on what you're on if it's working. But don't shut the door at the phrase clinical trial. Have an open mind.
Yes, great advice. Well, this has been lovely. I really appreciate each and every one of you, Dr. Rosenthal, Dr. Okai, and Anita. You've all been fabulous. Thank you so much.